Welcome CSC 121, Fall 2020, to our unit on turtles, where we're going to review functions and parameters and arguments and variables and nested loops and all kinds of other things, except we're going to use a model where we can actually see something visual that has kind of a graphical interface here instead of just the console down here. And it's a special module called the turtle module, which is part of Python, and you could use it in Replit, and you can't do turtles in something like Python Anywhere. In Python Anywhere, we can only use the console. So that's why we're using Replit for this. We have a lot more flexibility with using some GUIs in Replit. And also, just to point out, and I could go over this later in the semester, you can do turtles at home if you install Python and you use something like VS Code or some kind of IDE that you install at home, whether you're on Windows and Mac. You can run turtles. It's not just something that's done on the web. This is something you can do in a number of places. And again, it's for education purposes. Nobody's making money developing turtles, but it is a good way to kind of learn a little bit more and also to work visually. So this is our first example that we're going to use. Now, we use turtles in the CSC 103 class to introduce programming, and we're going to try to bypass some of the introductory stuff in there, but we'll still start here making some squares, and then right away we're going to use a function and variables and parameters right off the bat. Now, let me just show you this one. This is going to draw 4 squares. Notice it's using CMYK. It's using cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which, if you remember, are based on the RGB colors. Cyan is combined of blue and green, magenta is combined of red and blue, and yellow is combined of red and green of the RGB colors, and black is the absence of all of those, so they're all set down to 0 when you get black. So we're going to use the CMYK, and then eventually we might put RGB squares around here when we try to modify this a little bit more. But just to show you the code a little bit, we have variables here just so we can put hex numbers here, and we're going to figure out the hex numbers. They're not that hard, but that way we don't have to rewrite them other places, so we'll just make little variables here that we can use. We're going to make one function that draws a square, and the only changes in that square are going to be where it starts and what color it uses. We're going to use something called parameters that will act as placeholders so we can send arguments when we call the function. Now, when we work with functions, we're going to have a function definition, which basically is like the recipe or like a to-do list, and then the function call is basically executing it. It's basically doing it. So, this is like your car, and this is like your keys of your car to make it go. So that's kind of what we're going to do down here, and that way we're going to draw 4 squares using the same function, but just throwing in these arguments here, which are kind of like variables on the fly. Think of them that way. So they're kind of variables that we're going to throw in as we run the function or as we execute the function. So we're going to get started with that, and we're going to use a loop in here. We have a for loop, and I'll go over some of this stuff in here as we get started, but I just wanted to show you the finished product. And we're going to run it a little faster. And we're going to hide the turtle at the end. So when we run this here, after the turtle draws it, it's going to hide, and then a new turtle is going to be created, and then he's going to hide. And we're also going to put the pen up so we don't see the lines when they go to a new space. You're going to see lines when they draw the squares, but not necessarily when they go to another location. You won't see a line being drawn, because then you'd still see a magenta line when he goes somewhere else. So we're going to put the pen up when he goes somewhere else, and then it's going to draw a new square. So that's the way it's going to work, and we're going to get started with this from scratch. So I'm going to go into my repels, and I'm going to go in my CSC 121 folder, and I'm going to create a new repel. Now, this is a little different. We're not just going to use Python. We're going to use Python with turtle. And if you don't see it here, I'm not sure if mine's on top because I've used it before. Just scroll down and look for it. It'll have the Python logo, and it has a little tiny turtle with it. But it will have to say Python with turtle. You could just call this 12 dash, and I'll just call it turtle squares and CMYK. And if you want to put your initials at the end, just so I know it's you, that way if I have to import it into my account, I at least have something that isn't the same name as everything else. So you could do that and then hit Create Repel down here. And you'll know you're working with the turtle IDE if you have a console down here and you have your kind of white GUI over here. And obviously if you're in dark mode, I think you'll have, this will be dark over here. I think this will still be white in dark mode. I don't work in dark mode, but let's just see. Yeah, that'll stay white if you're working in dark mode, but I'm going to keep working in light mode. And I don't need to do anything over here. I have all my settings. Now, it's going to be a little different. You won't see the files over here, But what we're going to do to work with the turtle module, the first thing we're going to always have to do is say import turtle, because it'll bring in a special module, and it's actually bringing in a turtle.py file, which has all these kind of methods that are associated with it. It's actually object-oriented programming, so we're going to be using methods all the time with these turtles. But we first have to say import turtle, just like we did with the random module, so same thing. So to do that, we're going to start off by instantiating a turtle. I'm going to make the square first and make the turtle, and then we'll put it in a function. So we'll go in that process first. That way you can kind of test it out a little. So I'm going to just skip a line, and I'm going to make a turtle, and we'll just call it t. And we'll just say t. It's like a variable. So it'll say t equals, and we have to put turtle.turtle, and we have to put the module and then the class. So this is the turtle class. There's two classes in the turtle module, the screen class and the turtle class. This is everything related to the turtles, and this is the module. And notice it's lowercase, so you got to keep it lowercase. And this is creating an instance of the turtle, and we're just calling it t. So it's like a variable, sort of. But in object-oriented programming, it's called an instance, and this line is called instantiation. So it's creating an instance of a turtle from the turtle module and the turtle class. And then what I'll do is I'll give him some attributes. We could give him a color. We could give him a shape. I'm going to give him a shape of t.shape. I'll give him a shape of turtle, just so it looks like a turtle since we're working with the turtle module. We'll keep him like a turtle for now. Now you have to put it in quotes here. It has to be a string, because otherwise, if you don't have a word in quotes, it thinks it's a variable. So we have to put the quotes around that. So it takes strings as an argument here. And some of these things that we're going to put in here, we'll call them arguments. And some of them take an argument, some of them do not. Some of them have a default. So they could either be empty, or sometimes we have to put certain things in here. So I'm also going to put t.color. And I'm just going to make my first one red. We'll just start off with red, and then we'll do the CMYK stuff. So I'll just make it red. And you can just use basic red. You can just use HTML colors. There's a whole set of HTML colors. If you look up HTML colors, you'll see all colors that you can use. So it's not just basic colors. There's dark red and all kinds of colors that you can use. But we're still going to put them in quotes too as a string. So it accepts a string when you put that in. If you don't put anything in, it'll just show up as black. Black is the default for that. And I think classic is the shape for the turtle that's default, which is like a little tiny arrow that'll go around when you do that. But we'll make it look like a turtle for now. So if I run this right now, it'll do stuff. You'll see a red turtle there. So it doesn't have to be in a function. We could just do procedural programming, meaning we can just write commands going down the page if we want to. And that's what we've been doing a lot with Python so far. But now we're going to start putting things in functions and start kind of collecting them a little bit. But that's the start here. So we have a turtle, and we're going to make him draw a square. And notice he starts at 0, 0. There's a coordinate here, kind of like a 3D program. 0 is in the center for the X, and 0 is in the center for the Y. So he's at 0, 0. So if you go over in this direction, it's positive numbers going up to like 200, 250, and then negative numbers going to like negative 250 or so. We try to keep it in the 200 range. It can go bigger because you have scroll bars here, but we don't want to have to do that. So we'll keep it in this kind of 400 by 400 area when we work, but you can go bigger. And that's what the center thing is here. You could center everything in the middle. So if you're scrolling or something, you could click on this to recenter it. But they start at 0, 0, and they start going east. So when we start moving them, basically to draw a square, we're going to say go forward, turn left, go forward, turn left, go forward, turn left, go forward, turn left. And forward just means whatever direction he's going. So that's why it's forward. So whichever way he's turned, if he goes forward, he'll go that way. Again, if you watch the other videos on the turtle stuff that I showed, we'll do that. But we'll get him moving here, drawing a square right away. And what we'll do is we'll put two commands, and it'll just be t.forward, and we'll just do like a 100 pixel square, or side. This will be the side on it, but it'll make 4 sides that are 100. And then he'll turn, because each time he goes forward, we have to make him turn and then go forward again, and then he'll turn and he'll go forward again. So we're basically going to repeat that 4 times. These 2 lines will get repeated 4 times. And the turning is just left. We're just turning left, and you have to give it a degree. The argument it takes is a degree. If you don't do anything here, you get an error. And it says left takes exactly 1 positional argument, 0 given. That means, hey, you didn't give me a value here, so I have to give it a value. It doesn't have a default. Forward and left does not have a default, so it will not just assume a certain distance or a certain angle. So you have to put that in. Again, with color, if you don't put anything in, it'll just do black. And if you don't do shape, it'll just do like a little arrow. So that way we'll put in something there, and it did everything except for turn. Now it turned and we didn't get an error. So it's turning. So we're going to repeat that 4 times, and then we're also going to do a begin fill and an end fill to fill it up with its color, and it's going to use whatever color we made the turtle. Now, if we're going to do something 4 times, we already know how to do that. We know how to do loops already. I introduced that in the CSE 103 class, but we know how to do a loop. So we're going to take these 2 lines here and loop them. So right before these 2 lines, I'm going to say for I in range, and I'm going to put my parentheses and my colon and hit enter. And we'll make a loop here, and I'll tab this one over so that these 2 lines will get looped, and they're going to get looped or repeated 4 times. So that will help us draw a square. And if I run this, I get an error because what did I do? Bad input line 6. Oh, for I forgot the I here. So don't forget, I always do that. So you'll see me do that a number of times. For I in range, syntax error, and there we go. And we're not going to make him go in the center. I know in some of the other classes, sometimes we have him sit here in the center. We're just going to make him disappear. And actually, to make him disappear, we could do that right now. We could make that the next line. Let's make him disappear. We'll just say t.hide turtle. And I'll show you where to find all this stuff. So if you wonder where I'm just coming up with this, do I just know it by heart? I'll show you where to go. In the Python docs, they have all this stuff here. But we're going to hide the turtle. So let's see what happens. And he didn't hide. Turtle has no attribute. Oh, I spelled it wrong. See, I'm making errors here, but at least we know where our error messages are coming from, and it's telling me there. So I spelled it wrong. All right, so now he disappeared. So that's what hide turtle did. But what we also want to do is fill this. Now to fill it, we have to put a begin fill and an end fill, and it has to surround the commands that actually drew the rectangle or the square. So I have to go here and do t.begin fill. It's almost like HTML tags where you kind of put, like, to make something bold, you put an opening B tag and a closing B tag. It's kind of what you're doing here with the fill. And they use an underscore, so you have to do that. And there's no argument that you put in for fill. It's just going to fill whatever color you're using. And then at the end here, I'm going to do t.endFill. That also is an underscore between end and fill. And it's very important, this cannot be in the loop. If you leave it in the loop, you won't get an error. It just won't fill it. See, it didn't fill it because this needs to be outside the loop. It needs to match up with the begin fill. So make sure you unindent that. And now when you run it, it should fill it at the end and the turtle should disappear. So that works perfectly. And what we're also going to do is, since we're going to make a second one, and he's going to start over here, we're going to do something called pen up, because if we just made him go over here, if we made a second one and he went over here to start, you'd see the line coming down, because when a turtle moves, it always has a line going down. So what we're going to throw in here without a whole lot of explanation is, before we get started and before he does his thing here, we're going to do a go to, and we're going to tell him to lift his pen up, go to somewhere, and then put his pen down. That way, that doesn't help us here because it works perfect. But for the other ones, we're going to tell them, lift your pen up, go over here, and then put your pen down, and then draw your square. So that's kind of what we're doing. So we're just kind of thinking ahead. I know you may not be able to picture that, but if we make another square, if you watch the other video, you'll know what I'm talking about. But now what we'll do, if he's going to start somewhere else, we're going to tell him to take his pen up so he doesn't draw a line, and then go somewhere, and then put his pen down and draw a line. So that's what's going to happen here. So if I put this in, you won't even see anything different, but I'm going to do this so that when we make our function, we'll have that all built in, and it'll be set up for all our other squares to draw. So before we begin fill, before he actually starts drawing anything, I'm going to say t.penUp, and you don't need an argument for that. You're just telling him to lift his pen up. And then I'm going to say t.goTo. And you do need arguments in here, and you need x and y arguments. You need an x and a y just like that, except you're going to put in the value. Now, by default, they start at 0, 0. So that's where they start. So I'm just going to put 0, 0 in for now, because that way it'll be the same. But then we're going to change that. That's going to be one of the things that we're going to change. And then once they go there, because we want to draw this square again, if we do this, now we don't see the line because we just have pen up. But now when we want him to draw a square, we want to see the line. So after he goes to that place, we want to say t.pen down. And again, the idea is this could be like -100, 0, for example. If I put this at -100, now what we could do is he can go over there and do that. And you see he didn't have his pen up when he did it. But now if we put our pen down, and I forgot the parentheses here. Don't forget the parentheses. It didn't give me an error, but it didn't do the pen down. Sometimes if something doesn't work, just check that. It doesn't have wavy lines. It doesn't seem to give you as much of the errors like it does in regular Python. Now it's going over there and it's drawing it. So notice you don't see a line when he goes somewhere. You'll only see the line when he draws it. So we're going to do this a couple times. So this part here, these 3 lines that we just put in here, and I'll put this back at 0 because we're going to start the first one at 0. We'll put it at 0 right now. These 3 lines right here, 6, 7, and 8, they basically tell them to go to a certain place. So that is going to help us. It's not required for if you're just drawing one square. But if you're drawing multiple squares and if you're putting them in different locations like we are, then we should have that. So that's why we have that in there. And then he's beginning to fill. He's drawing his object. He's ending the fill, so it's filled up. And then he's hiding at the end. So these lines here, we're going to basically do a number of times. So we're going to put them in a function. And basically, it's going to be like a little to-do list that we're going to run or that we're going to call. So that's what we're going to do with this stuff. It's not just going to run in order like that, because if we had to draw more squares, we'd have to copy this and then paste it and copy and then paste it and copy and paste it. We don't want to do that. We want to be more efficient. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a function. And I'll do this first. We'll just make the function, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll make all the other ones. But to make a function, what I'll do is the line before here, and I'll just hit enter, and I'll define a function. And there's different ways to define functions in different languages. In JavaScript, you use function, use the function keyword. In Python, we use the def keyword, and then we give it a name. And kind of like variable names, you have to be careful about what name you give it. You can't have spaces. It can't begin with a number. Everything that you would do with a variable, do the same thing with a function name. So I'm going to call it draw square because that's all we're doing here. We're not drawing a red square because that may change. So I'm going to call it draw square. And I'm just being specific about it. And we have to put parentheses because that's what we do with functions. And we have to put a colon because in Python, whenever we have one of these header type lines that's going to have other commands or statements inside it, we have to indent them. Now again, in other languages, you might use curly braces, but here we indent. So we have to indent all this. So I'll just highlight all of these lines and just hit tab. And keep in mind, if you ever have to go back, just highlight them all and do Shift tab, and they could go back. But I'm going to hit my tab key and make sure they're all indented. And I like a bigger tab there, so that's why they're all moved over. Make sure you have your colon there, and make sure you have that. And right now, if I run it, nothing's going to happen at all because I'm not calling the function. So I need to call the function. This is like a to-do list, and then the calling the function is like doing it. The call is also called an invocation, means it invokes the function. So it defines it here, and Python knows everything it's supposed to do, but then it doesn't do it until you tell it to do it. So one thing you have to be very careful of is if you do this, if you just make an extra space here and call the function and put draw square, and this is the way you call it. You just give it the name with parentheses, no colon. You just give it the name like this, but you need parentheses here. If I ran this, it's not going to work. Do you know why? Some of you may know why already, because I have it indented, and it's actually part of the definition. So it can't be part of the definition. You can't call it within its own definition. If you run it now, it's not going to do anything. So you just have to make sure here that you move this back to the margin because it's not part of this definition. So this is the definition block, and this is the function call that's going to happen here. And obviously you have to spell it right, and you have to use the parentheses and all that. And if I put dots here, if I went here and I thought, oh, I have to have the colon, it's not going to work. You're going to get an error on line 17. It doesn't want that. And if you didn't have the parentheses and you ran it, nothing will happen. It doesn't see that as an error, but it just won't do anything. It won't call the function. So make sure you have your parentheses. Now when we do it, it's doing exactly what we did the first time. So again, that's not too exciting, but at least now we have the power of calling the function. And what we're going to do in the next video, basically use this function 4 other times. Except think about it, what has to change? Well, the color's going to change, and the position's going to have to change. But we have a color here, and we have a position here, so how are we going to change that? Well, we're going to use something called parameters, where they're almost like temporary variables, that we're going to basically send the variables in when we run the function. So we're going to make some variables, and we're going to use some parameters, and then we're going to call the function with some arguments in the next video. So stay tuned for part 2 of Turtle Square's CMYK.